My brother's girlfriend saw my daughter's smartwatch and went white, whispering, "You need to throw that watch away tonight." I was loading birthday party dishes into the dishwasher when Vanessa grabbed my wrist with trembling fingers. My brother Ethan was in the backyard with all the kids, pushing them on the swing set and being the fun uncle he always tried to be. Vanessa had been acting strange since they arrived 2 hours ago, barely making eye contact and checking her phone constantly. The smartwatch had been Ethan's gift to my daughter Riley for her 8th birthday, a pink fitness tracker with games and a camera that Riley had been obsessed with since opening it that morning. "What are you talking about?" I pulled my arm back and looked at Vanessa's face. She was maybe 24, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't fully hide. She'd been dating Ethan for about 6 months, and this was only the 3rd time I'd met her. "Don't ask questions right now. Just get rid of it tonight and tell Riley it broke." Her voice was barely audible over the dishwasher. "Please trust me on this." I glanced through the kitchen window at Ethan, who was laughing and tossing Riley in the air while she squealed with delight. He looked like the same brother I'd grown up with, the one who taught me to ride a bike and scared away my middle school bullies. Vanessa followed my gaze and her whole body tensed when Ethan looked toward the house. She immediately stepped away from me and started wiping down counters that were already clean. "I need to go," she said loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. "I have that thing with my sister tonight." Ethan came inside a minute later asking what thing, and Vanessa stammered something about a birthday dinner she'd forgotten to mention. They left within 10 minutes with Ethan looking annoyed and Vanessa refusing to meet my eyes as she walked out the door. That night, after Riley fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table examining the smartwatch under my desk lamp. It looked completely normal. Pink silicone band, small digital screen showing the time, 3 buttons on the side. I pressed the power button, and the screen lit up with Riley's name and a cartoon heart. I scrolled through the menus, finding basic fitness tracking features, a few simple games, and a camera function. Nothing seemed unusual. I almost put it back in Riley's room and forgot about Vanessa's weird warning. But something nagged at me about how terrified she'd looked. I grabbed my laptop and searched for the watch model number printed on the back. The results showed it was a legitimate kids' fitness tracker sold at major retailers. I kept searching with different terms until I found a tech forum post from 3 months ago. A parent had discovered their child's identical watch was transmitting location data to an unknown server. The post included instructions for checking network activity. I followed the steps, connecting the watch to my laptop with Riley's. Charging cable. The network monitor showed the watch was actively transmitting data every 30 seconds. Not to the manufacturer's server listed in the manual, but to an IP address registered to a server farm in Eastern Europe. My stomach dropped as I watched packets of data flowing from the watch. I downloaded a packet analyzer program and spent 2 hours figuring out how to read the data. The watch was sending Riley's precise GPS coordinates, audio recordings from the built-in microphone, and photos taken automatically every 10 minutes whether anyone pressed the camera button or not. I looked through the photo log with shaking hands. There were pictures of our kitchen, our living room, Riley's bedroom from every angle. Close-ups of our family calendar on the fridge showing my work schedule, photos of our front door lock, our back gate, even the inside of my purse when Riley had been playing with the watch yesterday. Someone had been documenting everything about our home and routine through this device. I called Vanessa's number 3 times, but she didn't answer. I texted her that I'd found something in the watch and needed to talk immediately. She responded 20 minutes later from a different number I didn't recognize. "Can't talk." He checks my phone. "Meet me tomorrow 9 a.m. at Riverside Park. Come alone and don't tell anyone, especially not Ethan." I barely slept that night, getting up every hour to check that Riley was still safely in her bed. I kept the smartwatch in a drawer in my room, unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching through it, even though I'd powered it off. At 8:45 the next morning, I dropped Riley off at my mom's house saying I had a dentist appointment. Mom asked why I looked so tired, and I made up something about insomnia. Riverside Park was mostly empty on a Thursday morning except for a few joggers and dog walkers. I found Vanessa sitting on a bench near the playground, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She looked like she'd slept even less than me. I sat down and waited for her to speak. Her hands were shaking as she pulled a burner phone from her jacket pocket. "I'm only telling you this once, and then I'm disappearing. Your brother is part of something really bad, and I didn't know until 2 weeks ago." She kept her voice low and her eyes on the park entrance. What kind of something? My mind was racing through possibilities. Drugs, stolen goods, fraud. Vanessa took a shaky breath. They identify families with young daughters, single moms or households where both parents work long hours. They give the kids these modified smartwatches as gifts from relatives or friends. The watches track everything and send it all back to them. They build complete profiles of the families, learn their schedules, map their homes, then they take the kids when the window is right. Her words hit me like ice water. My brother is part of a kidnapping ring? I heard my voice go up and forced myself to speak quieter. Ethan coaches. Little League. He volunteers at the Children's Hospital. Vanessa shook her head. I don't think he knows exactly what they're doing with the information. He thinks it's just identity theft or insurance fraud or something. But I went through his laptop when he was in the shower and I saw things. Plans for grabbing kids. Markets where they sell them. It's organized and professional, and your daughter's information is in their system now. I felt like I might throw up right there on the park bench. Why are you telling me this? Why not just go to the police yourself? Vanessa pulled her sunglasses down, and I saw a fading bruise around her left eye that makeup had mostly covered. Because I'm scared, and I don't have proof I can give police without him knowing it came from me. I shouldn't even be here right now, but I couldn't let them take Riley without warning you. You need to get rid of that watch and change all your routines, and maybe even move if you can. And please don't tell Ethan I told you anything, or he'll know I betrayed them. She stood up to leave, and I grabbed her arm. Who is them? How many people? How do I protect my daughter if I don't know who's watching us? Vanessa looked at me with exhausted, terrified eyes. I don't know all of them. I've only met 3 others besides your brother. They communicate through encrypted apps and use code words. The guy running it goes by Shepard, and Ethan is terrified of him. That's all I know, and it's already too much. She pulled away and walked quickly toward the parking lot without looking back. I sat on that bench for another 10 minutes trying to process everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan asking if I wanted to grab lunch later this week. Seeing his name on my screen made my skin crawl. I drove home and immediately called the non-emergency police line. The operator transferred me to someone in the detective division after I explained I had evidence of potential child trafficking. Detective Isaiah Flores called me back within an hour and said he could come to my house that afternoon. Detective Flores was in his early 40s with gray starting to show in his dark hair. He sat at my kitchen table and listened without interrupting while I explained everything from Vanessa's warning to the data I'd found on the smartwatch. I showed him the network logs and the photos the watch had automatically taken. His expression got more serious with each piece of evidence. He asked permission to take the watch as evidence, and I handed it over immediately. He said he needed to verify my story and investigate before taking any action against Ethan. The detective asked careful questions about my brother's background, his job as an IT consultant, where he lived, who his friends were. He wanted to know everything about Vanessa too, her full name, how long they'd been dating, if I knew where she worked. I gave him what little information I had and mentioned she'd seemed terrified and had a bruised eye. Detective Flores wrote everything down and said he'd look into it quietly without alerting Ethan that an investigation was happening. He also said I should act completely normal around my brother to avoid tipping him off. Over the next 3 days, I had to pretend everything was fine when Ethan called to chat. He asked how Riley liked the smartwatch, and I said she loved it, but I'd put it away for safekeeping until she was more responsible. My voice sounded fake and strained, but Ethan didn't seem to notice. He invited us to his apartment for dinner on Saturday, and I made up an excuse about Riley having a birthday party to attend. Every interaction felt like walking on eggshells, while my mind screamed that this person I'd trusted my whole life was involved in something unspeakable. Detective Flores called Thursday evening asking me to come to the station the next morning. When I arrived, he led me to a small conference room where another detective introduced herself as Carmen Wu from the Cybercrimes Division. They had examined the smartwatch thoroughly and confirmed everything I'd found plus more. The device had been professionally modified with hardware not included in the retail version. The GPS was military grade and accurate within 3 feet. The microphone had been upgraded to capture clear audio from across a room. Most disturbing was that the watch was designed to appear functional to the child wearing it while secretly collecting and transmitting data. Detective Wu pulled up a map on her laptop showing the location of the server receiving data from Riley's watch. The same server was receiving transmissions from at least 40 other devices scattered across 3 states. Each device was registered to a different child's name based on the metadata. They'd started coordinating with FBI Cybercrimes Unit because this crossed state lines and appeared to be part of a larger network. Detective Flores said they were building a case, but needed to move carefully to catch everyone involved, not just my brother. I asked what I should do to keep Riley safe in the meantime. Detective Flores recommended I stay with family or friends for a few days while they worked on getting search warrants. He didn't want to scare me, but said if the group realized their watch had been discovered, they might try to grab Riley quickly before their window closed. Hearing that my daughter was in immediate danger made everything feel surreal and nightmarish. I called my mom from the parking lot and told her we needed to stay with her for a while because of a plumbing emergency at my house. Moving Riley to Mom's felt like going into hiding. I packed bags trying to act like this was fun and temporary while my hands shook and my mind raced. Riley asked why we were bringing so many clothes for just a few days, and I made up something about the plumber needing to redo the whole system. Mom lived in a quiet neighborhood 40 minutes away. I didn't tell her the real reason we were there, just said I needed help with Riley while dealing with house problems. That night, I lay awake in Mom's guest room listening to every sound and checking on Riley every hour. Detective Flores texted Saturday morning saying they'd gotten warrants to search Ethan's apartment and electronics. The raid was happening that afternoon, and I should stay away from my house and keep my phone on. I spent the day trying to act normal for Riley's sake, while my insides twisted with anxiety. Around 4 p.m., Detective Flores called saying they'd executed the search warrant and arrested Ethan. They'd found detailed files on 23 children, including Riley. They'd also found communications with 4 other individuals who were being picked up simultaneously in coordinated raids. My mom walked into the kitchen right as I was hanging up the phone. My face must have shown something because she immediately asked what was wrong. I told her everything then: the watch, the trafficking ring, Ethan's arrest. She went pale and sat down hard in a chair. She asked how this could be happening and if I was sure there wasn't a mistake. I showed her screenshots of the evidence Detective Flores had shared. Mom started crying and saying she'd raised Ethan better than this, that she didn't understand where they'd gone wrong as parents. Detective Flores called again that evening with an update. Ethan was refusing to talk without a lawyer, but his laptop and phone contained extensive evidence. They'd found the encrypted messaging app Vanessa had mentioned and were working on decrypting communications with someone using the handle Shepard. They'd also located Vanessa, who'd checked herself into a domestic violence shelter 2 days ago and was willing to cooperate with investigators. She'd provided additional information about how the ring operated and identified 2 more people involved who they were now working to locate. Over the next week, more details emerged about the scope of the operation. The ring had been operating for at least 3 years across 6 states. They'd successfully taken 11 children who were sold through dark web markets to buyers overseas. Most of the kids had been recovered through international investigations, but 3 were still missing. The smartwatches were distributed through various methods, sometimes as gifts from recruited members like Ethan, other times through charity drives or even directly mailed to families with fake return addresses from children's organizations. I had to give multiple statements to detectives describing my interactions with Ethan and exactly how he'd given Riley the watch. They wanted every detail about the birthday party, what Ethan had said, how he'd acted. I told them he'd been insistent that Riley wear the watch right away and had spent a lot of time showing her all the features. Looking back, he'd been making sure she'd keep it on and that it was positioned to capture good photo and audio. The memory of him playing with Riley made me feel physically ill. The media picked up the story within a week. Local news ran reports about a child trafficking ring broken up by local police working with the FBI. They didn't name the suspects, but described the smartwatch scheme and warned parents to be careful about gifts for their children. My phone blew up with calls and texts from relatives and friends who'd seen the news and wondered if we were affected. I confirmed to close family that Ethan had been arrested and that Riley was safe. Most people responded with shock and disbelief. A few people defended Ethan, saying there must be a mistake or misunderstanding. My dad called from Arizona, where he'd retired 5 years ago. He'd seen the news, and Mom had filled him in on the details. He wanted to fly back immediately, but I told him we were safe, and there was nothing he could do right now. He kept saying he should have seen something wrong with Ethan, that parents are supposed to protect their kids from making terrible choices. I tried to tell him this wasn't his fault, but he wasn't listening. He said he'd be on the next flight anyway because his granddaughter needed him. Ethan's lawyer reached out to me through Detective Flores, asking if I'd be willing to meet with Ethan while he was in custody. The lawyer said Ethan wanted to explain himself and apologize. I refused immediately. Detective Flores said that was my right, and Ethan couldn't force me to see him. The lawyer called my phone directly the next day, and I told him to never contact me again. He tried to argue that Ethan was still my brother, and that families should support each other through difficult times. I hung up on him and blocked the number. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks after Ethan's arrest. I attended along with parents of 2 other children who'd been targeted. We sat in the back of the courtroom while the prosecutor presented evidence to determine if the case would proceed to trial. The evidence included communications between Ethan and Shepard discussing inventory and harvest windows that made my stomach turn. They presented technical analysis of the modified smartwatches showing the sophisticated surveillance capabilities. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence and scheduled the trial for 6 months out. Vanessa reached out through the Victim Advocate program asking if I'd be willing to talk. We met at a coffee shop with the advocate present as a mediator. Vanessa looked different from the last time I'd seen her. Healthier and less scared. She'd left all her belongings behind when she fled to the shelter and was starting over with help from a domestic violence program. She apologized for not going to police sooner. She said she'd suspected something was wrong for months, but Ethan had isolated her from friends and family, and she'd been afraid of what he'd do if she betrayed him. I asked her how Ethan had gotten involved in the first place. Vanessa said he'd met Shepard through an online forum about privacy and encryption about 2 years ago. At first, it seemed like just paranoid tech people sharing information. But Shepard had slowly recruited Ethan into the criminal enterprise by starting with small tasks that seemed legitimate. By the time Ethan understood what he was really part of, he was already implicated and afraid to leave. Vanessa thought Ethan had convinced himself it was just identity theft, not human trafficking, as a way to cope with what he was doing. The victim advocate helped me process my anger toward both Ethan and Vanessa. Part of me wanted to blame Vanessa for not reporting earlier, but the advocate explained how domestic violence and coercive control work. Vanessa had been genuinely afraid for her life, and had taken a huge risk warning me even when she did. The advocate said Vanessa's information had been crucial to the investigation and had likely prevented other children from being taken. Hearing that helped me start to forgive Vanessa, even though I'd never be able to forgive Ethan. Riley started having nightmares about a month after we'd moved back home. She'd wake up crying about bad people trying to take her. I'd enrolled her in play therapy with a counselor who specialized in childhood trauma. The counselor said Riley was showing normal stress responses to sensing the fear and tension from adults around her, even though I'd tried to shield her from details. We worked on helping Riley feel safe again through consistent routines and age-appropriate explanations about why some people do bad things. The school principal called me in for a meeting about Riley. Her teacher had noticed Riley was having trouble concentrating and was anxious about being picked up at the end of the day. I explained the situation in general terms without going into disturbing details. The principal was understanding and suggested Riley spend lunch periods with the school counselor for a while. They also agreed to let me walk into the building to pick up Riley directly from her classroom rather than meeting in the parking lot. These small accommodations helped Riley feel more secure. Detective Flores updated me regularly as the investigation continued. They'd arrested 7 people total, including Ethan. Shepard's real name was Gerald Vance, a former social worker who'd been fired years ago for inappropriate conduct with children in his care. He'd been running the trafficking network for over 5 years, using connections he'd made in the child welfare system. The FBI had been trying to track him for years, but he'd been careful about covering his digital tracks. The smartwatch scheme had been his newest method after previous surveillance tactics had been detected. 3 months before the trial, Ethan's lawyer contacted Detective Flores with a plea offer. Ethan would testify against Gerald and the other members in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecutor was considering it because Ethan's testimony would strengthen the case against Gerald, who was the primary target. I was asked for my input as a victim's family member. I told them I wanted whatever would put the most people behind bars for the longest time. If that meant Ethan got a slightly lighter sentence in exchange for taking down the ringleader, I could accept that. The plea negotiations took 6 weeks. Ethan would plead guilty to conspiracy to commit kidnapping, unauthorized surveillance, and conspiracy to traffic minors. In exchange for his full cooperation and testimony, the prosecutor would recommend 15 years instead of the possible 30-year maximum. I felt sick thinking about Ethan potentially getting out while still in his 50s, but the prosecutor explained this was the best way to ensure convictions for everyone involved. Ethan would also be required to register as a sex offender for life and have no contact with minors, including his own family's children. Gerald's trial happened first since Ethan had agreed to be a prosecution witness. I attended several days of testimony sitting in a courtroom, listening to horrific details about how the network operated. Ethan took the stand for 2 full days explaining how he'd been recruited, what his role had been, and how the smartwatches worked. He looked older and thinner than I remembered. When the prosecutor asked if he understood his actions had endangered his own niece, Ethan's voice broke, and he said yes. I felt no sympathy watching him cry on the stand. The defense attorney tried to paint Ethan as a victim himself, who'd been manipulated by Gerald. They argued Ethan had been psychologically coerced and hadn't understood the full scope of the operation. The prosecutor destroyed that argument by showing communications where Ethan had specifically asked about timelines for acquisition of targets, including Riley. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before convicting Gerald on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive sentences. Ethan's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 months after Gerald's trial. The prosecutor honored the plea agreement and recommended 15 years. Several other victims' families gave impact statements describing how the surveillance and fear had affected their children. When it was my turn, I stood at the podium and looked directly at Ethan. I told him he'd betrayed every family bond we'd ever had, that Riley still had nightmares because of him, that I'd have to explain to her someday why her uncle had tried to help strangers hurt her, that I'd never forgive him, and he'd never be part of our family again. The judge gave Ethan 17 years, slightly more than the prosecution had recommended. She said his cooperation was valuable, but couldn't erase the severity of his crimes. She emphasized that he'd specifically targeted his own niece, which showed a profound betrayal of family trust. Ethan would serve his sentence in federal prison and would have 10 years of supervised release afterward. The no-contact order with minors was made permanent. As they led him away in handcuffs, Ethan tried to turn and say something to me, but I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The civil lawsuit my lawyer filed against Ethan and the other network members took another year to resolve. We were seeking damages for emotional distress, therapy costs, and Riley's ongoing trauma. The lawyer explained we'd likely never see much money since criminals rarely have assets to seize, but the judgment would ensure they couldn't profit from their crimes in the future through book deals or media appearances. The court awarded Riley $2 million in damages that would be placed in a trust for her future therapy and education needs. 2 years after the initial arrest, Riley was doing much better. The nightmares had mostly stopped, and she was thriving in school again. She'd asked a few times about Uncle Ethan and why we didn't see him anymore. I'd explained in simple terms that he'd made very bad choices that hurt people and had to face consequences. As she got older, I'd tell her more details, but for now, she seemed to accept that explanation. The therapist said Riley's resilience was remarkable, and that with continued support, she'd likely recover fully. Mom struggled more than Riley did. She blamed herself for not seeing signs that Ethan was capable of such things. She'd go over childhood memories trying to find moments where she should have noticed something wrong. Dad and I both tried to tell her this wasn't her fault, but she carried the guilt heavily. She started seeing a therapist herself to process the loss of the son she thought she knew. Dad moved back from Arizona to be closer to all of us and provide support. The FBI used the smartwatch case as a training example for investigating tech-enabled trafficking. Detective Flores told me they'd developed new protocols for identifying and tracking modified consumer electronics used for surveillance. Several other networks had been broken up using similar investigation techniques after learning from our case. Knowing that Riley's situation had led to better protection for other children provided some small comfort. Vanessa graduated from a community college program and got a job working with a nonprofit that helped domestic violence survivors. She sent me a card thanking me for not blaming her and for understanding how trapped she'd been. We weren't friends, but I respected her courage in ultimately coming forward. She'd testified against Ethan and Gerald despite being terrified, and her evidence had been crucial to the convictions. The prosecutor said without Vanessa's warning to me, they might never have discovered the network before more children were taken. Riley's 8th birthday present taught me lessons about vigilance I'd never unlearn. I checked every electronic device that entered our home. I researched consumer products before purchasing them. I taught Riley age-appropriate lessons about privacy and safety. Some people said I was being paranoid, but I'd seen firsthand how predators use normal-looking technology to target children. If being careful meant I was paranoid, that was fine with me. 3 years after everything started, life had found a new normal that didn't include Ethan. Riley was 11 and thriving. She'd made honor roll and joined the soccer team. She rarely mentioned her uncle and seemed content with our smaller family unit. We'd moved to a different house in a different neighborhood, wanting a fresh start without the memories of Ethan's visits. Mom came over for dinner every Sunday, and we'd established new traditions that felt safe and happy.